Alright folks, we just learned about a new executive order that Trump is drafting up, and the implications of this could be very serious. So drop a like, subscribe, do whatever you need below, but let's jump in. Because Donald Trump, when he becomes the president again, has the ability to fire any general he wants at will. He can do that, but what's a lot harder is getting generals through the slow, bureaucratic process, getting them confirmed through the Senate, especially when you're trying to appoint loyalists. That's why we just got this article today that reads, Trump draft executive order would create board to purge generals. If this executive order is enacted, it could fast track the removal of admirals, but the removal isn't even the hard part. It's getting the loyalists confirmed through the Senate. We'll read this, but I also want to break down what's going on inside the Pentagon, what other generals are thinking, because we just got this article a few days back, Pentagon officials discussing how to respond if Trump issues controversial orders. Pentagon officials are holding informal discussions about how the Department of Defense would respond if Donald Trump issues orders to deploy active duty troops domestically or fire large swaths of apolitical staffers as he has planned before. We will break all of this down because Donald Trump has called people like Mark Milley, one of the most decorated generals in the country, the most decorated general, a woke, weak, and ineffective leader, because Milley said, hey man, you should be prioritizing the Constitution over your own narcissistic urges. Because as I lay this video out, I want you to remember, all of these people have taken oaths to protect our country against all enemies, foreign or domestic. And we know for a fact we have a lot of foreign enemies sniping at our feet right now, but it seems like the domestic problems are about to ramp up. Washington, the Trump transition team is considering a draft executive order that establishes a warrior board of retired senior military personnel with the power to review 3- and 4-star officers and recommend removals of any deemed unfit for leadership. If Donald Trump approves the order, it could fast track the removal of generals and admirals found to be lacking in requisite leadership qualities. And this just means fast track the removal of any generals who aren't sufficiently loyal, according to the draft of the order reviewed by the Wall Street Journal. It could also create a chilling effect on top military generals, given the president-elect's vow to fire woke generals, referring to officers seen as promoting diversity. But it's not even that. It's not even about diversity. It's about people who have said, this dude is a threat to our institutions and to the Constitution. And just for an actual genuine example of how this can be used, back on January 6th, and I know all MAGA Republicans watching are rolling their eyes when I say January 6th, but Donald Trump genuinely tried to get Mike Pence to submit a fake slate of electors. If Donald Trump had the military under his control, or if he had generals that were checking him and telling him, hey man, you have to stop doing this stuff, then it could have gotten a lot worse. So if he does purge all generals that are not loyal to him, this also creates an incentive structure for any new hires to be very, very loyal, or anybody who survived the purge to then be very loyal to Donald Trump. It makes it so that people are scared straight, essentially. And the annoying part is, I know that some Trump supporters are watching right now thinking, that actually does sound pretty good. MAGA generals who are loyal to Daddy Trump only. But no, number one, we live in a democracy where checks and balances are supposed to exist. And number two, just imagine if the roles were reversed. If Biden on day one fired all of the top generals, or even better, imagine Obama on day one fires generals who have been there for over a decade, or generals who were approved under Bush's administration, and replaces them with straight up Obama loyalists. He creates an oversight board and they just replace it with Obama loyalists. If the roles were reversed on any of the stuff that's happening, Trump supporters would lose their mind. Could you imagine? Just imagine if Biden won in 2020 and he had the owner of Twitter in his cabinet, he was seen hanging out with the owner of Twitter repeatedly. I believe it was Jack Dorsey at that point. But could you imagine if Biden won and was just hanging out with the owner of the largest social media who was a billionaire? Conservatives' heads would explode and they would call Twitter the state media, deep state. But when it's Elon Musk, they just bury their heads in the sand. Let's continue reading this article. The draft order says it aims to establish a review that focuses, quote, on leadership capability, strategic readiness, and commitment to military excellence. But the Pentagon already has an approval process that is way more thorough than this, that vets people based on their merit, based on their experience, and their strategic readiness. These are just synonyms for loyalty, if they are loyal. The draft doesn't specify what officers need to do or present to show if they meet those standards. It'll be arbitrarily decided by the generals that Trump picks for this warrior board. The draft order originated with one of several outside policy groups collaborating with the transition team. Maybe it'll be the Heritage Foundation. The warrior board would be made up of retired generals and non-commissioned officers who would send their recommendations to the president, and these retired generals would of course be Trump loyalists. And just listen, the establishment of the board would be in line with Trump's calls for purging what he views as failed generals, including those involved in the chaotic 2021 withdrawal from Afghanistan that Donald Trump laid out the timeline for, by the way, according to people familiar. He said he would ask all generals involved in the withdrawal to resign by noon on Inauguration Day. The president-elect previewed the move during a campaign event in October, saying that he's going to get rid of the woke generals. They're gone. And I have a few thoughts on this. Number one, this is how you get cooed, trying to fire generals en masse, but at the same time, Trump's doing this to prevent a coup. He's doing this to prevent generals from retaliating if he gives out insane orders, which, brings us to this article that I was reading. Pentagon officials discuss how to respond to insane orders. Quote, "We are preparing and planning for the worst case scenario, but the reality is we don't know how this is going to play out," one Pentagon defense official said. Trump's election has raised questions inside the Pentagon about what would happen if the president issued an unlawful order, particularly if his political appointees inside the department don't push back. And that's the key line right there, because we need to realize that it's going to come down to individuals holding the line. It is going to come down to individual people in these institutions saying, "I will not go along with what you're saying." A great example of this happened this week when the Fed chair, Jerome Powell, said, "No, I'm not going to leave if Trump asks me to resign." And listen, Jerome Powell isn't perfect. He's pretty apolitical most of the time, but him saying this shows that he is an individual who will hold the line.
Hi, Victoria Guido with Politico. Some of the president-elect's advisors have suggested that you should resign. If he asked you to leave, would you go?
No.
Can you follow up on, do you think that legally you're not required to leave?
No.
Straight up, just no. And it even gets better. Watch this one where he continues to hold the line.
The president has the power to fire or demote you, and it has the Fed determined the legality of a president demoting at will any of the other governors with leadership positions.
Not permitted under the law.
Not permitted under the law. A man of few words, but those words mean a lot. Again, it'll come down to individuals. People like Mike Pence, who we disagree with on a lot, but just listen to how he's speaking about the Constitution here.
The American people to know that I had no right to overturn the election. And then on that day, President Trump asked me to put him over the Constitution. But I chose the Constitution, and I always will. Anyone who puts himself over the Constitution should never be President of the United States. And anyone who asks someone else to put themselves over the Constitution should never be President of the United States again. What the President maintained that day, and frankly has said over and over again over the last 2.5 years, is completely false. I dismissed it out of hand, but sadly the President was surrounded by a group of crackpot lawyers that kept telling him what his itching ears wanted to hear.
I just think that's so well said. He surrounded himself by a bunch of crackpot lawyers who told him what his itching ears wanted to hear. This is coming from the man who was inside the White House with Donald Trump. Inside the White House. So this brings me on to what happened last night. Then I'm going to loop it back. I'm going to weave it back to the generals being fired en masse. But yesterday, Trump appointed Pete Hegseth, a Fox host. This reads, "Trump's defense choice stuns the Pentagon and raises questions about the Fox News host's experience." President-elect Trump stunned the Pentagon and the broader defense world by nominating an effing Fox News host. Fox and Friends will have control of the Pentagon and their $900 billion budget. Fox News host Pete Hegseth will now serve as the defense secretary. Trump tapped someone who was largely inexperienced and untested on the global stage to take over the world's largest and most powerful military. Lord have mercy on all of us. Angeles. The news was met with bewilderment and worry among many in Washington as Trump passed on a number of established national security heavy hitters and chose an Army National Guard captain well known in conservative circles as a co-host on Fox News Channel's Fox and Friends Weekend. That is literally the extent of his experience managing stuff. While some Republican lawmakers had a muted response to the announcement, others called his combat experience an asset and said that he was tremendously capable. Hegseth's choice could bring sweeping changes to the military. He has made it clear on his show and in interviews that, like Trump, he is opposed to woke programs, and he's even said that he doesn't think women should serve in combat roles. Trump said in Las Vegas, quote, "The woke stuff will be gone within a period of 24 hours, I can tell you." Hegseth has even said, quote, "Everything about men and women serving together makes the situation more complicated. In complication in combat, that means casualties or worse." I mean, if you're a man and everything gets more complicated because you're serving with a woman, I think that says more about the man in this situation. But this brings us on to this article. Who the F is this guy? The defense world reacts to Trump's surprise Pentagon pick. Hegseth is undoubtedly the least qualified nominee for a SecDef in American history, one veterans advocate said. Now, President-elect Trump's surprise pick of a conservative commentator to lead the largest military in the world shocked Washington, reads Politico, which had expected the nominee to be a seasoned lawmaker or at least someone with a modicum of defense policy experience, but I guess that is too much to ask. National security officials and defense analysts had braced for surprises from Trump after experiencing his first 4 years, but even grading on that curve, they say the announcement of a Fox News host and an Army veteran caught them totally off guard. Quote, "Trump puts the highest value on loyalty," Eric Edelman, who served as the Pentagon's top policy official during the Bush administration, said in an interview. Quote, "It appears that one of the main criteria that's being used is how well do people defend Donald Trump on television, and that is a great point, creating a media apparatus rather than an effective actual branch of the military." And this brings me back to the article about Donald Trump creating this new warrior board to fire generals en masse. I think I made this point earlier, but I really want to hammer it home and really make sure I'm clear about this. He's creating this warrior board to enforce loyalty, to create this structure where other officials are nervous if they are not completely loyal. One feared potential target of Trump's threatened purge could be Air Force General C.Q. Brown Jr., the chairman of the Joint Chief of Staff, according to two defense officials. And the reason why is insane. During the 2020 George Floyd protests, Brown spoke about the impact the movement had on him and what it was like to rise through the military as a black fighter pilot to rise to this high position of power, and Trump deems that as too woke, I guess. The executive order, which has been reviewed by the president-elect's transition team, may be presented to Trump when he takes office, and its implementation depends on whether he chooses to sign it in its current form. But on Tuesday, last night, when Trump announced Pete Hegseth as his Secretary of Defense, it only confirmed that Trump values loyalty over all else. And I will leave it there. That is a lot to take in with one video. I hope you guys appreciate what I do. Drop a like, subscribe, have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you in the next video. Peace out.